I have many copies of this, so later on we'll have opportunity to, if you're interested, to have one. And is to explain that religion and spirituality is entirely scientific. It's based on rationality, it's based on common sense, and it's based on hard empirical evidence. And I dare to say, and this may be a bold statement, but this is the first time in history, in modern history, that for the last 30 years, that scientists themselves have offered the evidence that shows that God must exist. So it's not just a question of belief or it's a possibility or yeah, it sounds okay, but no, this is decisive. It's an empirical fact. It's been observed, it's been established by scientists themselves. And oftentimes it's said that scientists are inclined towards atheism or skepticism. And that's true to some extent. If you go back into history, modern science came about 400 years ago. In the 17th, 16th, 17th century, were philosophers, scientists, people like Isaac Newton, Francis Bacon, other great philosophers like Locke, although he was not an atheist. In fact, many of those philosophers and scientists in the early days, they were not atheists. But gradually, and especially in the 19th century, there was a change of direction in science. What happened in the 19th century is that there were two major discoveries. One is Darwin's theory of evolution. Darwin published this book in 1859, if I'm correct. The other one was the discovery of the periodic table in chemistry by Mendeleev. And especially these two theories combined with Newton gave the idea that the universe is actually a mechanism that runs by itself. A very complex mechanism, like a clock, and oftentimes it's being compared to that, but it runs by itself. And there's no need for God. Although Newton himself was not an atheist, Newton was a deist. He believed that there was, in the end, even the laws of nature were created by somebody. They didn't just appear. So he believed that at the beginning, the very beginning, so that's very vague in those days because some believed that the universe was eternal. But whatever, he believed that at a certain point these laws were created by God. So he was not an atheist. But then Darwin came along, and Darwin said, well, we don't really need God even to explain that initial beginning. Especially Darwin was focused on life, biological life. And he saw that there's no need to explain an original creator of life forms, because life, of course, is very complex. If you consider that the human body consists of 80 trillion cells, not billion, trillion. I mean, that's an unbelievable quantity of cells, 80 trillion, and every cell is more complex than an entire city. If you take the city of Cologne, and if you add up all the bricks and the pieces of wood and lampposts and buildings and whatever, you add up all these components, that is less complex than one living cell, including, of course, the DNA within the cell. So, however, despite this incredible level of complexity, I mean, 80 trillion cells, and all these cells, they're doing, we are sitting here, we're talking, I'm talking, and you're listening. So that just that process alone, if you try to analyze it, what happens from second to second, you'll see there's millions and millions of interactions. Nerve impulses, molecules, atoms, electrical pulses, brain waves. I mean, whatever you want to call it, there's an enormous amount just to have this little meeting here. Incredible complexity. However, Darwin said it looks complex, it looks complicated, and it seems like it's very designed and very purposeful because every living creature, we are very specific. We can do things, we can talk, we can listen, we can work, we can walk, we can spring, we can jump, we can sleep. So it all looks very designed and very specific. However, Darwin was able to convince people that that specificness and that complexity just emerged out of chaos. It came by accident over a period of millions and millions and millions of years. Gradually, complex, simple things became complex. The complex things became even more complex. And the more complex things became even more complex. And the more complex, more complex became even more complex. And in the end, it created the universe as we know it, including human beings, animals, plants, everything in it. So this idea that evolution, and not just for biological life forms, that the evolution idea was then transferred to the creation of the universe itself. That the universe itself also came about by an explosion or some random event. And in the course of time, over billions and billions of years, that random mass of subatomic particles, atomic particles, and molecules, and floating around and bumping into one another, out of that chaos, somehow or another, the working universe emerged, the universe that we are in. So this evolutionary idea, and the idea that at the basis of everything there is chaos, and that chaos just moves around, atoms bumping into one another, and over a period of millions of years, these accidental bumps, they develop into a complex working structure. Now, it sounds, if you think like that, I mean, take anything that's man-made, like this smartphone. We know it's incredibly complex. Now, just try to imagine that this thing could have evolved by taking a bunch of screws and wires and put them under a little bit of dynamite, blow it up, and here's a perfectly working smartphone. We all know that sounds completely ridiculous. It is completely ridiculous, but somehow or another, Darwin was so convincing, and some of the other materialistic philosophers were so convincing, that the idea that this all happened by chance and that there's no need for God at all. At the 19th century, the end of the 19th century is called the golden age of atheism. Atheism reached its peak, philosophically, intellectually. And that kind of became the predominant paradigm. We still live with that paradigm. If you go to school or universities, what do we learn? We learn that the universe more or less came about, Big Bang, 13.7 billion years ago. A lot of things happen, a lot of explosions, supernovas, and at a certain point, biological life emerged out of some kind of slimy pond somewhere, and the first living cells evolved out of that, and then these cells started evolving, and that's still the paradigm that we learn in schools today, the materialistic point of view, that in the universe there is only matter and empty space, and the matter is divided into billions and trillions of atoms. And these atoms, they interact, they bump into one another, and that's how the universe evolved. That was the idea. Then there was a big change. Einstein came along. Relativity. Now, how does relativity undermine the mechanistic worldview? And the mechanistic worldview that everything is just mechanical things that bump into one another by accident that happens to lead to some working result. First of all, Einstein said, wait a minute, matter is not the predominant feature of this universe. Energy is, because according to Newton, the basis of the universe were atoms, and these atoms were indivisible. They were just hard particles that were created by God. It was the idea, basically, that if God puts an atom together, no one can separate it or split it. So the atom was the fundamental building block of the universe, according to Newton. And it was hard balls of little matter, little billiard balls that bump into one another. Einstein said, no, this is completely wrong. Matter, as a matter of fact, is a manifestation of energy. And energy is really the foundation of the universe, not material particles. The material particles are transformations of energy. So Newton said, atoms first and energy is a byproduct. Einstein said, no, energy first and matter is only a byproduct of energy. Because they discovered at the end of the 19th century, contrary to what Newton thought, that the atoms were indivisible, they realized that in fact they discovered what is called radiation, that there were particles that were smaller than atoms and they were radiating gamma rays, all kinds of different rays that were subatomic particles, and they were not discovered at that time. At that time it was discovered there are subatomic particles and the atom can be split. That evolved into a new theory that was invented here in Germany. It's the quantum theory. And what is the quantum theory? It goes a step further even than what Einstein said. Einstein said everything is energy. Quantum theory says that yes, everything is energy, and that energy is full of all possibilities. And some are actual and manifest, and some are unmanifest. But by some magical thing, for instance, if you look at it, if you look at the process, and this is one idea of quantum physics, that if you look at an object and all of a sudden the object manifests itself. If you don't look at it, it's not there. That kind of thing. It's a little bit weird, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But the interesting thing is that here developed the idea in quantum physics that there is a field of energy, and that field of energy contains all possibilities, all actualities, and all possibilities. Now, this is very interesting from a spiritual perspective, because that's exactly the explanation we find in the Vedanta philosophy. The Vedanta philosophy, which is the basis, the origin of Indian philosophy, it all came out of the Vedas, the Vedanta philosophy. And this Vedanta philosophy stated that the ground, at the foundation of the universe, is a field of energy. That field of energy is called Brahman. And that field of energy is full of consciousness and intelligence. Now, here is the missing link, because the quantum field, according to the quantum scientists, is really a field, but it's not clear whether that field is dumb or whether it's smart. Now, that seems to be such an obvious question, because we talked about it, the complexity of the universe. So, if that field is able to create this incredible complexity, including a human being with 80 trillion cells in his body, then it cannot be that that field is dumb. That field must be highly intelligent. It must be intelligent. It must be full of information. That was understood. You know, the quantum field theory was developed in the 1920s of the previous century, the 20th century. And they, when the recognition was there that this field is the unlimited field of all possibilities, then the next step obviously must be that that field must be intelligent, but nobody was coming to that point yet. Then another 30, 40, 50 years later, or more or less, and I must mention one point, that also in the 1920s, it was also discovered that the universe had a beginning, that the Big Bang was factually discovered. Because previously, before the 1920s, it was thought that the universe was kind of eternal, and that empty space was eternal, and atoms in it was eternal, and that was going on forever. So there was no beginning. The only problem was that with the discovery of gravity, Newton discovered gravity, Einstein also not discovered it, they reformulated. He said gravity is a curvature in time-space. But gravity is a force that only acts in one direction. It attracts. It doesn't expand, it only contracts and attracts in one direction. So if the universe is eternal, but it's ruled by the laws of gravity, that doesn't make any sense. Eventually that universe will collapse in on itself. All the gravity will pull everything together. So Einstein was puzzled about it, said, wait a minute, that doesn't quite fit with my theory. So in order to counteract this contraction, the contracting force of gravity, he postulated there's another theory. It's called the cosmological constant. There's another force that actually creates new matter all the time. So that even though the universe is contracting, new matter is created, so the whole thing remains stable. But then, around that time, there was another discovery. There was this famous scientist called Hubble. Never heard his name. He was a cosmologist. He was studying the universe through a telescope. If you don't mind, you can keep it open, the window, if it's not bothering you, because it's quite warm.
Yes.
Yeah, is that okay?
Yes.
So Hubble discovered that, and this was a big sensational discovery, that the universe was in fact expanding. So not only that it was not contracting, but the universe was in fact, a matter of fact, was expanding. This was sensational. That means the universe, since it's expanding, it must have had a beginning point. Because if you go back in time, if something is expanding in the future and in the present, that means in the past, it was smaller. And if you go back far enough to the beginning point, there is one point where it actually started. And that is the explanation of the Big Bang. So through the discovery of Hubble, it was firmly confirmed that the universe had a beginning. It's now estimated that was 13.7 billion years ago. So that's a long time. And that after that, the universe kept on expanding. So now the question is, if the universe had a beginning, and if the universe came out of that quantum field, then we come to the question, is that beginning, which later was called the Big Bang, is the Big Bang, is it dumb or stupid, or is it intelligent? The same as the question about the quantum field. Is it dumb or is it intelligent? Now we know that the quantum field had a beginning, the Big Bang. So the same question arises. Is this Big Bang smart or is it dumb? This discussion lasted until the 1950s, 1960s. There was one famous philosopher, Fred Hoyle. He was an atheist. And in the 50s and 60s, he was very, in previous century, he was very dominant and he was an atheist. But then all of a sudden he came to the realization of, wait a minute, and he's the scientist that used the analogy that, let's say if you have a junkyard full of parts and, bits and pieces, and there is a hurricane, blows over the junkyard, and all of a sudden after the hurricane there's a Boeing 747 ready, perfect, flying, engines, everything working. He said, this is crazy. It's the same example as what I was using before, an explosion, and all of a sudden things start working and they all come together in a miraculous, magical way. So he was an atheist, and he came to the realization. And he came to that realization because he was studying the nature of atoms and subatomic particles and how they were interacting and the forces that were going on. And he said, this is weird. Like carbon and hydrogen, they got these weird properties that make it possible, that carbon is very important for, in any chemical structure. Life forms are also based on carbon kind of structures. So then he discovered that there were very specific properties that could not be explained in a normal way. And then he completely switched from an atheist to something of a theist, who at least rejected atheism and said, well, it's impossible. This example of the junkyard and a Boeing 747, coming out of it through a hurricane. It's like, the Big Bang, and then all of a sudden, out of this Big Bang, this big mess and this huge explosion, all of a sudden a functioning universe is manifesting itself. It doesn't make any sense. So he rejected atheism based on that, but he had no alternative explanation. The alternative explanation came a little bit later, in the 1980s. And the discovery was first done by a scientist. His name was Brandon Carter in 1974. He gave a lecture in Poland. And he was the first one who introduced the concept of what is called the anthropic principle. And the anthropic principle means that there is a force in the universe. We don't know exactly what it is, but the anthropic principle is the force in the universe that makes it possible for living forms like human beings to be there, to exist. So isn't it, he said, isn't it amazing, miraculous that we exist? That we are here in this form with this body with the 18 trillion cells and it's all working, and sometimes it doesn't work as we would like, when you get sick and die and grow old and die, but it's our lives of course are not perfect, but most of the time it's kind of functioning. For 70, 80 years our bodies are functioning in a miraculous way. So he came to this, it's impossible, the forces of these subatomic particles and how they interact and how they create these incredibly complex things that actually work. There must be another explanation. So what was discovered, this anthropic principle, but even the anthropic principle that was discovered by Mr. Carter didn't actually explain what it was then that made it happen. So what they simultaneously discovered, and that's been discovered over the last 100 years, that there are in the universe only 4 forces. So all these things that are happening, the Big Bang, the quantum field, the creation of life, the planetary systems, the universe existing, the sun, solar systems, galaxies, you name it, supernovas that explode, all of these things, they are ruled by 4 forces. And these 4 forces, they are called the fundamental forces of the universe. They're gravity, you already mentioned, electromagnetism, which was discovered by Maxwell at the end of the 19th century, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force. Now, gravity we all know, right? Don't need to explain. We're sitting here, we don't fly off in space because the Earth is spinning around. That would normally happen, centrifugal force, and we'd all be gone. We're flying around. I think the speed that the Earth is turning is like 1,200 kilometers per hour, something like that. So if you calculate the centrifugal force, we would all be flying. But we don't fly. We are sitting here solidly on the ground because of gravity. So gravity is a fundamental force. It rules everything in the universe over massive distances as well. It's a force that has an unlimited reach. Then there's the electromagnetic force. The electromagnetic force, it rules everything that has to do with chemistry. It has to do with light. It has to do with radiation. It has to do with interactions between molecules and atoms. Then there's the strong nuclear force. We know now, we've learned all in school, university, that the atom basically is it's a little kind of mini solar system. You have a nucleus consisting of protons and neutrons, and they are subdivided into quarks, and there's different varieties of quarks. And then we have the electrons that are orbiting the nucleus, and the electrons are negatively charged. The nucleus is mostly positively charged, and the whole thing, especially that nucleus, is kept together by an incredibly strong force. Why is that force so strong? Because the nucleus is very tight. If you take an atom and if you would enlarge it, then the nucleus would only be a tiny little spot inside of a huge. If you take the dome, the Vatican dome, that would be the size of the atom. And if you look at the nucleus, that would be a tiny little speck of dust at the bottom, the center of that dome. That's how the relationship is between the size of the atom and the nucleus of the atom. That nucleus is consisting of protons and neutrons, and protons are all positively charged, so they repel one another. Now, how do you keep them together? That's by the strong nuclear force. That strong nuclear force is extremely important because of the strong nuclear force, we are able to have what is called fusion of energy. The scientists in the 19th century, they were wondering how this thing, the sun, we see it shining every day. enormous amount of power, enormous amount of energy, enormous amount of light, but how long will it last? Scientists in those days did not know about the principle of nuclear fusion. They thought it must be some combustible material. Maybe the sun is made of charcoal, or it's made of coal, or made of gas, or it's burning up over a period, because the sun is massive. So, but they calculated. One scientist, Lord Kelvin, I think was his name, he calculated that the sun could only last 10 million years. Then it would be completely burned up. Then, of course, Einstein came around, E is mc squared. And this is the formula that exactly explains the strong nuclear force, because E is mc squared means that the energy within the atom is of such a massive quantity that if you're able to unleash that, it would create an explosion beyond belief. And that's, of course, we all know that. It's the atom bomb, the nuclear bomb, which many scientists believed was impossible, even though they knew that the atom could be split. They knew there was a massive amount of energy based on E is mc squared. Because for your understanding, E means energy, M means mass, C squared means the speed of light, which is a massive amount. It's 300,000 kilometers per second times square. So multiply that by another 300,000 kilometers per second. That is a massive amount of energy contained within a tiny little atom. The atoms are so small, they're imperceptible. Even with the strongest microscopes, we cannot detect them. We can see a little bit of the circumference, but they're massively small. And just for your information, for your understanding, the atom bomb that was dropped at Hiroshima was only 60 kilos of uranium. About this big, you can carry it. And that one bomb was able to destroy an entire city with 100,000 people in it. You could just imagine the power. In those days, before the bomb was actually tested, many scientists didn't believe it could work. In fact, Einstein himself, although he discovered E is mc squared, he discovered the incredible power contained within the atom, he did not believe that it could actually be unleashed, that they could find a method of splitting the atom. And through the 1930s, the Nazis came to power in Germany. They were very eager to develop a nuclear bomb, of course. Scientists around the world, the Japanese and the Americans, they were working on it. In 1939, Albert Einstein, who had fled Germany because he was Jewish, so he's fleeing the Jewish persecution that was happening in Germany. So he went to the United States, and in 1939 he wrote a letter to then President Roosevelt. And he said, look, Mr. President, I don't know exactly the words that he used. He probably didn't say, look, Mr. President, but he said, Mr. President, I want to warn you that the German scientist, especially Werner Heisenberg, who was very famous, he's one of the founders of the quantum theory. But he was working for the Nazis at that time, and he was working on an atomic bomb. And Einstein said to Roosevelt, it's extremely important that the bad guys don't get the access to the nuclear bomb. And so America should build it and end the war in that way. And that's what happened. The so-called Manhattan Project that started in 1941. Roosevelt took Einstein's warning very seriously, and they organized a team of, in fact, there were thousands of scientists. I think altogether they built a whole city somewhere in the desert in New Mexico. And there were tens of thousands of people working there just to create the first nuclear bomb, because nobody knew how to do it, and if it could work, and how to make it, and what, they were trying different things. And so finally in 1945, on the 16th of July, they had this, called the Trinity, the first nuclear explosion, the famous, you may have seen the movie Oppenheimer. It's all about that, the discovery of the atomic bomb and the first explosion, the successful explosion. So that finally proved the incredible power of the strong force that we were talking about, the strong force within the nucleus of the atom. Then there is the weak force. That's a less relevant force, but it's also fundamental because it creates radioactive decay and it allows atoms to migrate into other kind of isotopes of other kind of atomic structures. So these four forces rule everything in the universe. Now, what is the big thing about this? What is the big discovery? What is this anthropic principle that was discovered by Mr. Carter? The big thing about it is that these forces, they have a value. Gravity has a certain number, the strong force has a certain number, the weak force has a certain number, electromagnetism has a certain number. And these are widely different numbers. They have nothing to do with one another. It's not like 2 + 2 is 4 and 4 times 4 is 16 or something like simple. Very, very complicated. Very strange numbers also, many digits behind the decimal point. And these forces, scientists discovered, and this is the discovery in the last 30 years, that these forces have exactly the right number so that the universe, the atomic structures, the subatomic structures can exist at all. And if these forces would differ only 1% or a fraction of 1% in relationship to one another, the whole universe would either implode, it would become a black hole, it would explode, it would become a supernova, it wouldn't function at all, it would just be creating a soup of atoms that don't do anything. These forces have to have the precise measurement in relationship to one another for there to be any form of a creation, for there to be, let alone life, but even there to be a rock or a planet or an ocean of water, for anything to exist, these four forces have to be exactly right. And this is an inexplicable mystery, because then scientists, and especially mathematicians, they started calculating. Okay, now what is the chance of these four, and oh yeah, the other thing I have to mention, that these four forces, they couldn't develop through an evolutionary process. That I mentioned at the beginning, that Darwin said, everything is evolution. You have a chaos at the beginning, give it time, then over millions and billions of years, that mess will turn into something workable. That was the idea. Now, with the Big Bang, that idea was demolished because scientists discovered that these four forces, they had to be there, not just a few million years after the Big Bang, at the first trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second, and I'm not exaggerating, we're talking about ridiculously small numbers. Within that first trillion of a trillion of a trillion of a second, these four forces had to be there in perfect balance, in a perfect quantity, and in a perfect relationship to one another. This blew everyone away. My God, how are we going to explain this? How are we going to explain this and stick to a nice atheistic, mechanistic, everything came out of chaos kind of philosophy? Doesn't make any sense, impossible now. It had to be right within a fraction of a second. Scientists, mathematicians, one very famous mathematician, his name was Roger Penrose. And he's not necessarily a theist, but he made a calculation. What is the chance of that happening by chance? Now, in mathematics, there's a branch of mathematics is called probabilistic mathematics. Now, there's one law. That law states that if anything is less probable than 10 to the power 50, if it's less probable than that, then it is impossible. So it's like the tipping point, where something that's highly unlikely, but that still could if it's 10 to the power 49.999. But if it's 10 to the power 50, or 10 to the power minus 50, I should say, then it becomes impossible. Now, the number that we are talking about here, when Mr. Penrose made his calculations, it's 10 to the power 10 to the power 123. So you get a double exponential range. If you write that number out, the number itself, if you write it out in a 10-point character, it would fill up most of the visible universe. Just the number, physically writing it out, let alone what it means. It's totally impossible that that number, knowing that that is the chance that this could have happened by chance, 10 to the power 10 to the power 123. I mean, it's a mathematical, it's a 10 with 123 zeros. I mean, it's just unbelievably complex, unbelievably impossible. And the conclusion is that if there has to be an explanation how the universe came about, there's only two possibilities. It either came out of this chaos, or it came out of something organized, something intelligent, something designed, something created purposefully. There must be information, there must be intelligence, there must be consciousness at the basis of that. And that's not just a religious, sentimental notion. This is a real hard scientific fact, because the alternative is impossible. So if you have two possibilities, and the one is impossible, there's only one left. Even though the one that's left, meaning God, Krishna, yeah, that's in the sense problematic that most of us have not met Krishna. Most of us have not seen God. And that I can say, I talked to God and he explained to me how he created the universe. And he said, yeah, you're right. You know, I did it. It didn't happen by accident. We don't have that evidence. At least we don't have that personally. But we have another source of information. That source of information is the Vaishnava Sampradaya, it's the Vedic literature, the Vedanta philosophy that explains all of these things, not in the modern science, using the modern scientific terminology, because that's the language of today, of the 20th century, but it is that Vedic knowledge is so incredibly powerful because it explains exactly the big dilemma that we are facing. How did it happen? Well, there must have been an intelligent creator. There must have been God. Now, of course, that statement we find in every religion. In the Bible, it says that God created Earth. In the Vedas, it says God created the universe. There's a little difference in the magnitude of the creation. So all religions basically accept that God exists and that he's the creator and the source of everything. But the Vedas, they go a step further. They also explain that, for instance, in Christianity, the theory is that God created the universe out of nothing. Creatio ex nihilo, in Latin, nice Latin term. The Vedas don't agree with it. According to the Vedas, God is eternal, and his energies are also eternal. And these energies are basically transformations from him. This is called, in Sanskrit, parinamavada. It's very important. Parinamavada. Parinamavada means that creation means transformation. It's not creating something out of nothing, because nothing doesn't exist. So you can't create anything out of it. That's very fundamental in Vedic philosophy. There is no nothingness. There's no emptiness anywhere. The universe, what we think is empty space, is not empty space. It's full. And even scientists now acknowledge that the quantum field, the famous quantum field, it's everywhere. It fills up everything. So the same as in the Vedanta philosophy, we learn that Brahman is all pervasive. Krishna has three energies. It's himself. He's the Purusha, the creator, the origin, the source of everything, the supreme personality of Godhead. There is the impersonal energy that emanates from him, that's Brahman. And there is personal energy that emanates from him, which are the jivas. Then there are also plenary expansions, because Krishna is so incredibly infinite that he can infinitely recreate himself and still be infinite. And every expansion is also infinite. So just try to think of that. It's a little bit mind-boggling. But basically, these two energies are there. There's living entities, and there is Brahman. And Brahman manifests itself in two levels. Material energy, which is a derivative of Brahman. And then there's the Brahman itself, which is effulgent, Satchit Ananda, but not with personal consciousness, impersonal consciousness. And then there are the jivas, like us. We are jivas. We are little souls tiny little specks of Brahman energy, but we are eternal, just like Krishna is eternal. So it's not like in some religions says that we were created at one point and before that we didn't exist. No. As Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 12, there never was a time when I did not exist, nor you nor all of these kings. And therefore, Krishna is eternal and we are eternal. So qualitatively, we are identical to God. God is Satchit Ananda. We are Satchit Ananda. Sat means eternal existence. Chit means full knowledge. And Ananda means unlimited bliss. Except that we do have these properties in a minute quantity. So we are qualitatively the same as God, yet we are quantitatively different from God. And this is exactly the difference also between what we call impersonalist philosophy, Mayavadi philosophy, who say that we are all God. In the end, we just temporarily here because we forgot that we are God. So we were a version of dumb God. So, because God, usually if he's really God, doesn't forget that he's God, but we did. So it's a really kind of lousy explanation. But this is the foundation of Vaishnava philosophy. God is the origin of everything. We are part of his energies. God is the source of all energy, and we are his energy. But both of us are eternal. So we are eternal beings. God is an eternal being. So then we come to the point, and that's really interesting in our philosophy, because if everything is one, basically everything is Krishna, yet within that oneness, there is also a manyness. We are many. And the universe is diverse. It has many different aspects, colors, shapes, forms, smells, so many different varieties of different properties. So there is an enormous diversity, yet it's all one at the same time. This is where, in the end, all paths of, you say, complexity and mysticism merge together in a philosophy called Achintya Bheda Abheda Tattva. Who has heard of this term before? Achintya Bheda Abheda Tattva. Achintya means inconceivable, Bheda means duality, and Abheda means oneness. Krishna is simultaneously, inconceivably, and I'll come to that because that is not, inconceivability is not irrational, but it is supra-rational. There's a big difference between irrational and supra-rational. So Krishna is supra-rational, simultaneously one and simultaneously many. And this is inconceivable. It's a contradiction, it's a paradox. Now, what is the interesting thing about this paradox? That science itself has discovered that this principle of Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva is true because they have empirically, by observation, observed it in the laboratory. And what did they discover? The same, the quantum layer, the quantum teachings, the quantum philosophy. They discovered that a particle, let's say an electron, it's this little particle, a subatomic particle. An electron can simultaneously be a particle and simultaneously it's a wave. They call it, in science, they call it wavicle. Yes. And this wavicle is Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva. Because if you really think about it, it's impossible. Because how can somebody be a particle, which is in one location, and a wave, which is everywhere? And this is also leads to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. It's based on the same principle. That something is a wave everywhere and a particle simultaneously. So therefore you don't know. You cannot measure the speed. You cannot measure the location simultaneously. So this is a mystery which is inexplicable, yet we know it's there because we observe it. So in the same way, the universe in itself, if you think about it from a theoretical point of view, the universe could never exist. We could never exist. God could never exist because it's all impossible, because it's full of contradictions. And that makes the universe, on the other hand, so incredibly amazing and magical and interesting, because all of these paradoxes are simultaneously true. They are impossible, yet they are true. Now, and that is not the same as something that is irrational. Let me explain the difference. When you say a square circle, that's irrational, because a circle by definition is not a square. By definition, it's round, because that's the definition of the word. So when you say square circle, then you might as well call a circle a square and a square a circle. It doesn't mean anything, so it's irrational. When you have something supra-rational, then this is something that we, if you think about it logically, that could not happen, that could not exist. Yet when you open your eyes or you go to the laboratory, you look through your microscope, you see it actually is happening, that this, what is impossible, is really true. So that is the majesty and the magic of this universe. And that's why scientists get confused in the end, because they end up with a paradox. And unless you have the understanding of Achintya, Veda, Veda Tattva, you'll never be able to figure it out. That is the magic of this Krishna conscious philosophy. It gives the key through Achintya, Veda, Veda Tattva to understanding the universe. And knowing that the explanation of Vaishnavism, that there is a supreme being, that there is a highly, infinitely intelligent Godhead, who created this whole universe by transforming himself and creating a diversity which is completely compatible with the oneness, and creating a oneness that is completely compatible with the diversity. That's unbelievable. I mean, that's magic, that's mystery. That's why, in the end, the universe is also, and this lies at the, I mentioned Sat Chit Ananda. Sat means pure existence, Chit means full consciousness, Ananda means bliss. And what is the elements of bliss? Actually, the element of bliss is that you experience something that is ununderstandable, that is so overwhelming that you cannot grasp it intellectually, but you can only feel it in emotion in a state of what's called ecstasy. And that's the highest ecstasy that devotees experience in the spiritual world, because they're free from all the dualities, they're in close relationship, in a loving relationship with Krishna, and they are constantly amazed by the magic of the creation, but the wonderful experience that the existence of the universe, and especially not just talking about the material universe, but we're talking about the spiritual universe, which is of a superior quality, infinitely superior to the material universe that we know. That spiritual universe is so unbelievably magical, and the feelings of attraction, and the law of gravity that you see, the attractive force in the universe that keeps matter together. Well, the law of gravity in the spiritual world is pure love. It's the love that Krishna has for all of his parts and parcels, for all of his creations and all the living entities that emanate from him. But also between living entities themselves, everyone is in love, everyone is loving, everyone is in a state of complete bliss and ecstasy. And that can only be because we are constantly confronted with the Achintya principle of the unbelievable and inconceivable nature of reality. And that inconceivable nature it stirs the emotions to the point we feel or experience what is called ecstasy. So there's a really interesting connection in that sense between the Vaishnava philosophy and because in the end Vaishnavism is not just an intellectual exercise trying to understand the universe, but it is in the end developing feelings of love for Krishna. And the way that we can do that in this Kali Yuga, because we all know that it's Kali Yuga. Who doesn't know, who has never heard of Kali Yuga? Everyone heard of Kali Yuga. Okay. So we're in Kali Yuga. It's not the best time to be around on planet Earth. Better not to be here at all and just be in the spiritual world. But if you're here, then preferably not in Kali Yuga, but here we are. Now, there's one good thing about this particular Kali Yuga, and Srila Prabhupada explained that because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu doesn't show up in every Kali Yuga, he doesn't appear in every Kali Yuga, and he did in this Kali Yuga 500 years ago. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came and he offered a solution for us very conditioned souls, very fallen souls in Kali Yuga, even for us to be able to become liberated from the material world by a very, very simple formula. You don't have to sit on a mountaintop for 100,000 years meditating and eating leaves and twigs and just doing incredible austerities. All we have to do is chant Hare Krishna, chant the Maha Mantra, together or alone, japa, or together, bhajan and kirtan. And by doing that and following certain basic principles, not even too difficult, it's actually possible in this Kali Yuga for us to become liberated. So we have some fantastic things, an incredible philosophy that explains the way science actually works, leading us to a really satisfying understanding of the fact that God must exist. Just like philosophers said that Darwin made it possible to become an intellectually, Dawkins said that. Dawkins, the great atheist philosopher, he said, Darwin made it possible for us to become an intellectually satisfied atheist. Krishna consciousness philosophy makes it possible for us to become an intellectually satisfied theist, fully convinced that we are not just living in some crazy bubble, that we are just, some new agers with some strange ideas about whatever, but a really strong, solid philosophy rooted in science, rooted in mathematics, rooted in a strong intellectual foundation that's to support this entire philosophical system in a way that it's intellectually completely satisfying. And I can say for myself, I spent the last 40 years studying pretty much every religion, every philosophy in the world, and not everything in great depth, but some things in great depth, some things a little bit less. Some things are also less interesting, for instance. Not every philosophy in the world is very interesting. But I have not found anything that even comes close to Vaishnava Vedanta philosophy, that comes close to Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva, that comes close to fully understanding the relationship, at least intellectually understanding the relationship between us and the Supreme Being, and between us and God. So I haven't found anything that compares, except that, that's why I'm also very enthusiastic about being able to have the opportunity to present this philosophy. I spend a lot of time studying, so it's very nice to be able to explain it and to be able to make sense so that people say, okay, I don't believe everything you say, but a lot of stuff you're saying makes sense. So that alone, if people can start accepting that a religious, spiritual point of view makes sense, that it's common sense, and it's actually a good thing. Because, let's face it, we've seen religion not playing a very, glorious role in human history, right? I mean, here in the Holy Roman Empire, in I think the 17th century, we had this massive, the 30-year war between Protestants and Catholics, after Luther, I think it was in 1515 when he nailed his statements and basically tried to destroy the Catholic Church and create a Protestant revolution. It's led to one misery after another. I mean, and even the Catholic Church, they went through their terrible period of Inquisition, whereby people were tortured just to make them more holy and more, obedient to God. I mean, it's just crazy. Christian consciousness is not based on violence. We are very peaceful, pacifistic kind of philosophy and religion. Of course, if we have to defend ourselves, we will defend. I mean, Arjuna was on a battlefield, in the battlefield of Kurukshetra, and Krishna told him to fight because that was his duty. But Krishna said, I've tried everything to make peace with these other guys, with the Kurus, Duryodhana, and but they are not interested in peace. They're just greedy, they're materialistic, they're full of ego and hunger, lust for power. I can't stop them. So Arjuna, now you have to fight. You just have to do your duty. But Krishna conscious philosophy is very, very peaceful. We don't want war. We don't want fights. We want to, if there are differences of opinion, we'll debate them. We'll sit down like civilized human beings, sit down and discuss and try to convince one another with arguments. That's also the Indian tradition, by the way. I mean, India in its history has not had a lot of religious violence within the Hindu community. The culture was that culture of debate. You know, if you know, there's famous stories of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He was a brilliant scholar, and how he would defeat great Mayavadi impersonalist philosophers. You know, that Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, I think one of them, Prakasananda Saraswati. These were massively intellectual, you know, giants in those days. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu defeated them very sweetly, very nicely, but very strongly, very sharp, intellectually devastating. I mean, he was an intellectual brilliant, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. That's why this Achincha Advaita Tattva philosophy is so incredible. So, no, we are very peaceful philosophy. We believe in respect. The basis of Vaishnava philosophy is that we are all the servants of the servants of the servants of the servants. We all serve one another. We serve our friends, our families. We may serve strangers. Our attitude is service. That is the foundation of Krishna conscious philosophy. We are, in the end, simply the humble servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And we are the humble servant of the humble servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or the humble servant of the humble servant of the humble servant, and so on. So in the attitude of service, just try to imagine if all the world leaders today would be a little bit more less paranoia, a little bit more willing to serve one another, a little bit more conscious of not inflicting pain on other beings just for my own ego and aggrandizement because I want to recreate the Russian Empire or recreate or conquer this country or that country, be, you know, the great conqueror and go down into history as whatever. You know, that's all stupid. You know, most conquerors, by the way, they all fail. You know, they all end up in a horrible death. You know, only a few that kind of, you know, Stalin kind of managed to die in his bed rather than being hung up or strung up by a lamppost or having to put a bullet in his head. So that's not our philosophy. We believe in righteousness, and we believe that leaders in our society should be good people, decent people with compassion. They maybe have to be tough in order to defend, but only in that condition. So our philosophy is a philosophy of respect. It's a philosophy of service. It's a philosophy of goodness. It's a philosophy of reaching out to other people. That's not woke or this or that. That's just civilization. Civilization means to try to serve your fellow men and women. It means to try to be a good person in a constructive way. You know, so that's, just try to imagine if the world would be ruled by more people with that attitude. You know, we've seen a few. You know, we've seen, of course, we know like persons like Nelson Mandela, for instance, who suffered incredibly. He suffered political persecution. He was put in jail just because he wanted, you know, to have a normal life and have something to say about the society that they live in, and not be oppressed by a little minority. So he's praised because of his kind of saintly personality. He was able to avoid war. He was able to create some kind of consensus after the terrible experiences in South Africa with apartheid and all of that. So these kind of people are rare. But you know, that's what the Krishna conscious philosophy is aiming at. We are trying to educate leaders, if it's possible, to be.
About the Nelson Mandela, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I read in the text that he was in very much contact with Bhakti Tirth Swami Maharaj, and he was studying Bhagavad Gita quite in detail. Nelson Mandela himself.
When? That's after he came out of prison, right?
Yeah. He read Bhagavad Gita also in the prison, and then he was.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Ah, didn't know that.
And then he was in contact with Bhakti Tirth Swami Maharaj, learning the Western philosophy and
story. And yeah. So we have examples of good people and how they can change the world. And this movement, and Prabhupada was very explicit about it. He also talked about the peace formula and how, bringing Krishna consciousness to the world will make the world more peaceful in every possible way. I mean, just the fact that we are against animal killing and that we are all vegetarians. We think the killing of animals is terrible. It's a crime. Animals are just like us. They're sentient beings. They have a developed nervous system. They can feel pain and fear. We don't have the right to kill them. We should respect them and not kill them. There's no need to kill them. So just that karma alone, if you can reduce the amount of animal killing, what kind of positive karma that would create by the absence of negative karma, how much positivity that would create in the world. So this philosophy has many aspects that are really wonderful, both on a personal level, but also on a collective, social level, even on a political level, and also on a scientific and an intellectual level. So
half an hour, 6 until 6 o'clock. At 6 we have a Gora Arati.
okay. Well, I would suggest maybe now to have the opportunity to have questions or comments or.
Questions?
Yes.
Why time is not considered to be a fundamental force?
Because time is not a force in itself. Time is passive. It allows things to happen, just like space. It allows things to happen, but it's not in itself a force. A force is, the definition of force is something that makes something move. So time itself, it facilitates movement, but in itself, it does not move.
Then why gravity? Why gravity is a fundamental force?
Because it makes things, it moves things. It's a fundamental force, because the definition of a force is something that will generate action. So that's a very specific definition. So gravity generates action. If I hold this thing, I'm not going to do that to the Bhagavad Gita. When I hold this, I drop it. This, I didn't do anything, I just let it go. So the force of gravity pulled it towards the center of the earth. So that's the definition of a force.
So first of all, Prabhuji, thank you very much for your lecture on this spirituality. I really want to thank you because you have put together so many things in this compact class. It is very hard for me to grasp everything. Okay. Now you have emphasized this quantum particle and quantum field to explain the nature of our Supreme Lord and also how creation is happening. And also, like in nowadays, quantum particle and using this quantum field as like it's in the field of science, it's gaining very traction of using this quantum computer. Okay, they are using this qubit and everything, which is very similar what you have explained just now.
Yeah.
And even I have heard many Prabhujis who are more inclined to scientific theories and everything. They have explained many similarities about this. Now, the action what we have learned from this quantum mechanics that there are two particles that they might be entangled.
Entanglement.
Entanglement, and they are interdependent to each other.
Yeah.
And also, Albert Einstein also mentioned that spooky action.
Spooky action at a distance. Yeah.
So, is it really possible in this natural world, or it's kind of coming from the spiritual sense, or it's just mathematically proven, or
I have serious doubts about the final outcome of the quantum computer, because the essence of the quantum computer is to be able to, the normal computer works on ones and zeros. So it's called bivalent logic. It's a 1 or a 0. It's no other possibility. So that actually is the essence of logic. The laws of logic consists of three principles. There's the law of identity, there's the law of contradiction, and there's the law of excluded middle. The law of identity simply states A is A. The law of contradiction says A is not B. And the law of excluded middle says that law A is either A or it is B, but there's nothing in between. Basically saying that something either exists or does not exist. There's nothing in between existence and non-existence. So that means it's a binary principle. The essence of logic is binary. It's true or false. Now, Achincha Beta Beta Tattva, as I mentioned, is the exception because it's on a supra-rational level for a different reason. But the quantum computer, to apply this principle, where a 1 becomes a 0 and a 0 becomes a 1, in my opinion, it will never fully work. Because if you apply that principle, you run into a problem, and all this stuff that I've read recently in the latest developments of quantum computers is that they are very close, they're almost there, and not quite. And that almost there and the almost there always moves up. So that will be next year and the year after. It's a little bit like fusion, the fusion dream of fusion energy, which of course happens, in the sun is one huge fusion reactor, but it's a massive thing. To recreate that here on Earth, where you can control the enormous temperatures and energies that are being released, is extremely difficult. Now, they've tried, and last year there was an experiment, they created a little bit more energy than you had to put in. It's not quite there yet. So they have been saying that for the last 40 years. Now, I'm not discounting the possibility that we will be able to create cold fusion on Earth in a contained kind of environment. I think with the quantum, it's even more fundamentally problematic. Because fusion does exist, but quantum computing, where ones become zeros and zeros becomes one, and still you run a mathematical process that works, I have my doubt. Yes, sir.
My name is Abhishek, and I came late actually. I had no idea about this, but actually I got few things. So I had a question from a very long time. I used to watch a lot of documentaries and this spiritual things. So, what do you think that that Vishnu, Shankar, or Mahadev, and Brahma, they used to be supreme being who used to roam on earth.
Yeah.
And but to something happened and they left, or maybe they still are here, but not in front of the people. And but on few times they come in some kind of forms or some kind of like they send some
An incarnation.
human. Sorry.
You mean an incarnation?
Yeah, incarnation or some kind of things they do, or means they used to be here or not. What's your opinion?
But what exactly is your question?
This is the question. Means they used to roam among us
Yeah.
a lot of time before, but they left due to some reason. What could be that reason also?
Well, Krishna appeared 5,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Lord Buddha, who was an incarnation of Krishna, Shaktavesha avatar, he came about 3,000 years ago. Lord Chaitanya came 500 years ago. So they come, but from a human perspective, in Kali Yuga, when we live no average 80 or 90 years, then 3,000 years or 5,000 years is a long time. But Krishna has his schedule, and that's explained in the Vedic literature. So he does appear, and then, or he not only he himself incarnates, but he also sends messengers, gurus, teachers, enlightened souls that can help to spread the knowledge of Krishna consciousness. Not like Srila Prabhupada was an exceptional person who came to the Western world to spread Krishna consciousness, which has never happened in the last thousands of years. The British, they conquered India, but they didn't really understand Hinduism. And in fact, they thought it was kind of an inferior religion, and Christianity was really superior, and that all these Hindus should be converted to become Christians. But they never understood Vaishnava Vedanta fully. And also because Shankaracharya caused a lot of problems. Shankara came in the 8th century, started teaching this impersonalist philosophy. So that really polluted India. A lot of Indian people, they go to do deity worship, but they still think the deity is only an impersonal manifestation of Brahman. They don't really believe that there's Krishna personally. So Srila Prabhupada did also a miracle by invigorating the original understanding of what popular Hinduism is. Popular Hinduism is personal. Krishna is worship. There's bhajan, there's puja, and so on. But intellectually, it was considered to be, these personalities, all these gods and demigods, they're just manifestations of Brahman. The ultimate reality is Brahman. Tattvamasi. We are all Brahman, that's it. So India was polluted in that sense, besides the colonial period and all of these things. So Srila Prabhupada reinvigorated the original strength of the Hindu religion, we call it Hindu religion or Vedic religion, by bringing it back to its source and by giving an intellectually satisfying explanation that is contradicting the impersonal philosophy. So today, the Krishna consciousness movement in India is doing fantastic because people recognize, oh, wait a minute, I know this philosophy. Now I understand why I'm worshiping Krishna, not just because he's a statue and so that I can merge with him. No, because we can develop loving feelings for Krishna and offer him service. So that's a very different attitude. And I think that's, so Krishna comes, he sends his messengers, and so there's plenty of, and we are lucky in this Kali Yuga that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared only 500 years ago. And his teachings are the reason why we are sitting here.
Prabhuji,
Yes.
you said during the lecture that you have read every other philosophy to come to a conclusion that Ajita Veda is one of the prominent philosophy or good philosophy.
Yeah.
So what other literatures you have read to come to a conclusion? Like, have you read the concept of Advaita Vedanta? Have you read the concept of what Ramanujacharya came to preach, or have you read what Madhvacharya preached? So did you read all this all together to come to a conclusion that Ajita Veda is the best philosophy? And what literatures you have read there?
Well, I did study the teachings of Ramanuja and Madhva, because basically they're all Vaishnavas. They all saying the same thing. The difference is that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu explicitly called the simultaneous oneness and difference of Krishna and his energies. He explicitly called it Achintya Veda Veda Tattva, and none of the other acharyas done that. They implicitly implied it. If you read Ramanuja, Ramanuja's philosophy is Vishishtadvaita, which is basically oneness and difference, and the other one says difference in oneness, but they're all talking about difference in oneness, but they never explicitly say that it is simultaneously one and different and inconceivably so. So that is really the contribution of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But all the sampradayas, Nimbarka, Vishnu Swami, Madhva, Ramanuja, they all basically say the same thing. There are, differences in some way, some differences in practice and so on, but fundamentally it's not different.
And what about the Shankaracharya? What literatures you have read?
Well, Shankaracharya, that's the difference. Shankara is the 5th sampradaya, which is not a bona fide sampradaya in the sense that the teachings of Shankara are incorrect. He denies the personal existence of God and basically states, that's why they're called Mayavadis, that diversity is an illusion and the only thing that's real is the impersonal Brahman. And so in the end, the only thing that exists is Brahman in a totally impersonal, formless, attributeless state of pure energy. And that's incorrect. So that's a wrong philosophy to put it bluntly. And Ramanuja very strongly argued, because Shankara would say, look, this world is all illusion. Then Ramanuja would say, okay, if this is all illusion, now, is this illusion, is it a real illusion? And then the Shankara follower would say, yeah, it's a real illusion. Yeah, but if it's a real illusion, then it's real. That it's not illusion. The definition of illusion is that it doesn't exist.
Yes.
Oh, then he said, no, it's not an illusion. Oh, then it's also real.
But is it not practically experienced by Shankaracharya?
What?
Is he not practically experienced that in his life? The concept of Advaita Vedanta, whatever the experience that has to come through that, whatever the experience, the end game of whatever the concept that has to reach by Advaita Vedanta, was Shankaracharya did not experience that.
No, look, there is an experience. You can experience Advaita. It's called the Brahmajyoti. So there are yogis that practice meditation and they're able to liberate themselves from duality and start, recognizing the impersonal Brahman. And in the impersonal Brahman, you get the sensation of infinite oneness and pure consciousness. And Brahman is also luminous, so it's also, it is, what is the right word? Yeah, luminous. So it has these properties of Satchitananda, but it's not the final realization, because beyond Brahman, there is the source of Brahman. Beyond the sunlight, there is the source of the sunlight, which is the sun. But if you're sitting in the sunlight, you can't see the sun because you're just overwhelmed by the sunlight. So the yogi that merges into the Brahman experiences the Brahman as a sense of oneness and merging with an undifferentiated reality, because he's blinded by that same Brahman effulgence, so he cannot see the personality that's beyond Brahman, which is Krishna. So in one sense, it's a real experience, but it's an incomplete experience. Yes, sir.
So I have a question regarding karma. So as we all agree that the possibility of universe being coming is very much a minute possibility in the chance the universe came out. So it's not possible that it came out from nothing. So God must have created it.
Yeah.
So in addition to that, I would come to the point where if God must have created the universe and everything, that also means that whatever consciousness we have is also being created by God, and whatever we are doing and everything is being directed by God, and we are just toys in gameplay.
No, not completely, because we have free will. That's the unique nature of consciousness. That the essence of consciousness is that you have a degree of independence, because you are the center of your awareness of things that you perceive. And consciousness has 4 unique attributes. There's two passive ones, that's intelligent perception and emotional perception. And there's 2 active ones, which is willpower and desire. So willpower and desire are forces, they create things. The passive one is perception, emotional, intellectual perception. So these are all the functions of consciousness. Sorry, what was your question again?
So the question is like, as God created and as
Okay, yeah.
consciousness
So,
is also
sorry.
directed by God, and
Right.
we are just
No, because we have these 4 faculties: willpower, desire, perception, awareness. We also have independence, because if you have willpower and desires to do things, but you're not able to do anything, then your independence, your personality as a unit becomes meaningless. So we are not robots. We are not artificial intelligence created by Krishna. There's so many people today think artificial intelligence, ooh, that's going to compete with human beings. Eventually the computer will become conscious, take over the world. All nonsense. A computer can never become conscious, no matter how much artificial intelligence you put into it. All the artificial intelligence is exactly what it says, it's artificial. The real intelligence is the programmer, the software engineer behind it. So the essence of real consciousness is a degree of independence. And that's exactly also the problem. And we have not talked about it. I want to do that in some of the later classes, which is the principle of theodicy, the problem of evil. Because this is, in fact, the strongest, and we have not talked about it yet, but we will come to that. The strongest argument that atheists use against the existence of God, that if there is a God and he's all powerful and he's a nice guy, why did he create this lousy universe with wars, with birth, death, disease, and old age, with terrible things happening? Why did he create this kind of failed universe? He's not able to create anything better than this, or doesn't want to. Maybe he can, but maybe he's a little sadistic. So I don't, the atheist thinks, I don't think God exists at all, because, with all these problems with suffering and evil, doesn't make any sense. Yes, it does make sense if you understand the principle that we are slightly independent personalities eternally, and that sometimes an independent person can do something wrong, just like we are all living here in this country, Germany. Wonderful country, you have laws and rules, but some people decide to transgress those rules. They become offenders, or even worse, if you rob a bank, you become a criminal. So at the same time, if you look at the German population, that's 85 million, the amount of criminals, people sitting in prison, how much do you think in percentage? It's 0.03%. It's nothing. So Srila Prabhupada at one point said, and they were talking about this, if you're in the spiritual sky, this material world, the material universe, is a little cloud in a corner. And the amount of living entities living in there, it's kind of comparable, to the amount of criminals sitting in prison, 0.03%. But if you take 0.03% from infinity,
This is also infinity.
it's a lesser infinity, but it's still infinite. So, even the material world, it's massive. And the amount of people in there is massive. But still, compared to the rest of reality in the spiritual world, it's very, very small. So the problem of evil is that some souls decide to not play according to the rules. They want to have more power. Now, even that is not a problem, because if you're in the spiritual world and you have a relationship with Krishna, maybe a Shanta Rasa, kind of neutral relationship, it's still you're a pure soul. Yeah. So, but at a certain point, you decide, okay, I would like to have some more creative power, to be not just a subservient devotee and being in a kind of service mode, but you want to be in a more active mode. That can happen. And Krishna is very kind. He creates a material universe for that purpose. When you fall down to the spiritual world, you first become a demigod. It's not that you immediately go to hell, because you haven't done anything wrong yet, except for, the fact that you want to have a little bit more power. But if you use that power, like Lord Brahma, if you use that power in the service of Krishna, there's nothing wrong with it. In fact, you can spend one life as Brahma, it takes a few billion years, and you do your job very well. You run an excellent universe, you get everyone Krishna's, well, Brahma, you did a good job. You can come back to Vaikuntha because you were such an excellent servant. Now, Srila Prabhupada explained that even the planets, the highest planets in this material universe, are practically in quality of life almost identical to the spiritual world. There's not much difference. The only difference is that in the material world, at a certain point, you do die. Even Lord Brahma dies at a certain point. So you don't want to take that risk. And the other problem is that if you have power, and even if you use that power most of the time in the service of Krishna, but sometimes power can have an intoxicating effect. And then, you want a little bit more and a little bit more. You start transgressing your power, the limits of your power. Then you become an abuser. And then you create karma. And it's through karma, because the essence of karma is that you cause suffering to other beings unnecessarily. You take something that's not yours. That's karma. you get punished for that. There is a reaction. It's not even a punishment, it's a reaction to settle the score, to make sure that the universe is in balance, that it's harmony, and that in the end everything is working to make sure the cosmic order is not interrupted. Because that's the whole goal of creation, is to make sure that the creation functions. And the ones running, like in this country, we have a president and his responsibility is to run the country, make sure that everyone is more or less happy. So demigods, they have the same responsibility. But if they abuse that power, then you can fall down into the lower regions of the material world. That's when you enter planets like Earth or even worse. And that's when you create karma. And so that is, the living entity is prone to that because we are qualitatively the same as Krishna, but quantitatively we are different. So therefore, as a soul, we cannot completely foresee for all eternity the result of all of our actions. So when we take the decision to enter into the material world, we don't fully understand the consequences of all of that. That's the risk that we're taking. So better not to do it in the first place. Now it's only 0.03%. So, we were, let's say, unfortunate that we happen to belong to that 0.03%. But in any case, now we have an opportunity to get out of it. And that is what this Krishna consciousness movement is all about. Yes?
And I have an extension of it.
Yeah?
So I framed out an analogy for karma, and I would like to know your perspective of how you see it, because I also follow this philosophical ideas and everything. So the idea which I mentioned about free will and all, when I mentioned the idea of free will has been rotating in the philosophical community recently. So that's why I mixed this idea of God and free will to ask to know about your perspective. So this analogy is that with karma, so let's consider there's a well, and inside the well there is a devil, and
Say it again, there's a wheel?
well,
A well.
or a pond or something, so that
Yeah.
human is standing on the edge of the well, and the devil is inside the well, and the jiva is being given a thread, and other side of the thread there is God helping him to not fall into the well.
Yeah.
So my question is that, so when the God created jivas, so initially when the first step when the jivas are created, the form, I don't understand the concept of karma in that sense, because God randomly chosen some people to be in bad side and good side, so that the whole system of system lives on. So as a person who is standing on the edge and he has done karma and devil is pulling him down, and he has no help from the God initially, as God himself chosen a jiva to be a bad, and he will fall into the well, and eventually, so every time again he comes into life. So the karma is going to build up only, and even though he gets a chance in between, God gives him a rope to pull him out, the karma will eventually pull him down even more. So eventually the karma is building up when a jiva is went into the bad side of the karma, so he will definitely go eventually into the karma mode.
Yeah.
And a jiva who is given a good side, he will definitely go into the good side. So I don't understand the concept of karma where we have the choice of doing it and all.
Well, karma is when you create suffering to other living beings unnecessarily. That is karma. That creates karma, and it requires a response where you are being neutralized or you're being punished for your act of acting in disharmony with the cosmic order. Just like I gave the example of our society here, if you park in the wrong place, you get a parking ticket. If you rob a bank, good chance you go to jail. So you do things that are forbidden. And that's what karma essentially is. It's abusive power to do things. If you rob a bank, you cause suffering to maybe the bank People working there, they get harmed, and people have their bank in money in their bank, their money is stolen. So there's all kinds of things that acting in disharmony with the cosmic order always creates suffering for other living entities. That's the whole idea. The idea of the laws of karma is to give everyone the room to exist without interference, without undue interference. So everyone has that freedom to act in the right way, to follow the laws. And if you do that, then everything is fine. So in the same on the cosmic level, it's exactly the same. Yep.
Yeah, I would like it's Aarti time, so I would like to get the answer shortly.
Yeah.
We were talking about 0 and 1, like the things are either 0 or either 1. But if I see as a person, that everything has always been a process. Like kid is born, he has to go through a process. Either he or she is choosing spirituality or going to study or going to the materialistic things. Like when it comes to quantum computers or something, then also it's a process. So there are two ideas, either we are 0 or 1, or either it's a process. So how could we choose that either we are going through a process or it's zero?
Well, you're asking a very smart question. And basically you're asking the question about Achincha Beta Beta Tattva. Because reality is either diverse or it's one. And
Yeah,
it is simultaneously.
Because then even it comes to the pain,
Look
we
at
say
method.
trust the process.
Huh?
When even it comes to the pain, we say that trust the process of God. Then either also it's not 0 or 1. So what is your opinion about, like it's a process or we should start with 0 or 1?
No, it's a process, and it's 0 and 1 simultaneously. It's Achincha Beta Beta Tattva.
Between 0 and 1 then, because you just said that nothing exists between 0 and 1.
According to the laws of logic. And that's why I said Achincha Beta Beta Tattva is supra-logical. But according to the base law of logic, as we know it in this world, according in philosophy, science, and mathematics, you're dealing with zeros and ones. You're dealing with something is true or not true. The three laws of the law of identity, the law of contradiction, the law of excluded middle. But there are realities that supersede that. Now, whether a quantum computer can do that, that's another story. When God created it, yeah, God can certainly create a quantum computer. The whole universe is one massive quantum computer, where constantly we are dealing with supra-rational realities that are true all the time, but they are created by God. For us to be able to create that, it's a lot more difficult. We don't have that kind of power.
And then when it comes to the evil side of somebody, how should we say that all the four fundamental forces are creating that evil power? Because God will never wanting us to be on the evil side. Why would He even get put a thought in our mind? Okay, you can this thing is going to be wrong, or you can do this thing wrong.
No, you're asking why does God give us independence? That's what you're asking.
Yeah, like the feeling
well,
of choosing a bad side. Like,
yeah, no,
is
but
it the force
God could get.
Fundamental forces, or is it God putting that idea into somebody?
Okay, say that again.
Why would eventually a God will put a evil idea in somebody's mind, or is it the four fundamental forces which are against the God, or the superpowers, or the
No, the four fundamental forces are just a mechanism through which the universe is ruled.
So how?
But our consciousness, we are different as individual human beings. We are beyond the four forces. The four forces act on us. Our body is made by the four forces. But our consciousness, our soul, is beyond the four forces, because our soul is a spiritual energy. And the four forces are material energies. That's the difference.
Yes. But it's not beyond the supra force. So why can't the supra force stop the evil side of us?
Why can't?
Our thoughts, the willing is above the four fundamental forces, but
Yeah.
it's not above the supra force or the God. So how come the supra force cannot stop our negative energies?
Because of freedom, because of our independence.
So
You're asking, could God have created a human, could have God have created beings that can never do anything wrong, or that will never be evil, or that will never make a mistake, or that will well, the problem is related to the 0.03% of souls, that's these 0.03% decided, I don't like this 99.999. I'm going to do something different. That's a freedom that we have. It's a minute freedom, but it's enough to give our lives completely different directions.
Is it a small comment or you want to say? You want to say? Okay. So yes, thank you very much. I know that there are so many questions to all of you, and this shows the success of this seminar, the success of this class, that he has awakened our inquisitiveness, our thoughtfulness about this topic, and I know I can appreciate that these questions are wonderful, and Prabhu is also answering so nicely, very
I just had one question.
Actually, we have a now Gora Arti. We want to give you the chance, but maybe after the Gora Arti, you can ask Prabhuji separately, because now we have a fixed time at 6 o'clock, and we would like to. We have a tomorrow morning 7:45. So tomorrow 7:15 we have the Darsana Arti, Singal Arti, and after the Singal Arti at 7:45, quarter before 8, we have again class from Prabhuji. The extension of the seminar will go on, and I request all of you to please come tomorrow morning also. And we will continue the same discussion further and much more deeper, insights and deeper realizations about this science and spirituality. We can continue this tomorrow morning also. Please join everyone. And then on the Sunday festival also, we have a lecture from Prabhuji. So we have around 4.5 to 5 hours session, in 2 days. So there will be enough time for the question answer, discussions, personal interactions also. But now, due to lack of time, we have to stop the session now. And I want to also announce that at 6:30, after the Gora Arti and Narsimha Arti, we will also have a Bhagavad Gita session, which is a regular weekly session here. Every Saturday, we have 6:30 a Bhagavad Gita session, also prepared in a scientific way, very, very comprehensively. So you are all invited to also stay here after Gora Arti and attend the Bhagavad Gita session. And then we will have a prasadam, wonderful, tasty prasadam from our temple, and devotees have been prepared for all of you. So after the Bhagavad Gita, everybody can take
How
prasadam.
long is the session? Because I am outside the city. I came from Portland, so I need to
Yes.
get a train.
Maybe the session is 1.5 hours actually, 6:30 to 8 o'clock. So you can maybe attend half an hour something, and then you
No,
can.
I think I'll.
If you can get something, you can already take some prasadam before leaving. Yes. So nobody will leave without prasadam. We have enough prasadam. So now we would like to thank Prabhuji, His Grace. We want to thank you, His Grace Hari Krishna Prabhu, and we will chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra for him. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Prabhu ki jai, Prabhupada ki jai.